After the massive session this morning, when I arrived here, I was one of the first one arriving. And it was only one or two persons here. I said, oh my God, it looks like probably nobody is going to be interested in our topic. So I recalled the story of somebody who was invited to give a lecture. When he arrived, there was only one person listening to him. So he started wondering, what do I do? And he said, well, at least somebody is interested on my topic. So he started the lecture. And the attendee was not precisely interested. In fact, he was kind of sleeping. And so he interrupted the lecture, and then he said, could you please tell me why you were interested in my topic? And then he said, well, I'm not really interested in your topic, but what happens is that I was commissioned to close the door when you finish. So that's why I'm very pleased that now we have many, many volunteers to close the door this session. So I recently joined the World Bank as a coordinator of higher education, and I will share with you some lines about the position and the work that the bank has been doing in the issue of world-class universities. But I think it is very important to analyze briefly the context in which higher education operates today. Certainly, all of us know that we live in a new world, which is characterized for being more global, highly competitive, technology-driven, which is constantly changing, and also, more important, that we live in a world which is based on knowledge. But unfortunately, we like it or not, the reality is that there is persistent inequality in today's world. And certainly we have a role in higher education to play in changing that inequality. Think about the fact that in recent years, fortunately, the number of very poor people in the world has been dramatically reducing. However, still there are many people which are extremely poor in the world, many of them in our countries, and also the fact that in the next year, there's going to be a new generation of middle class in the world, which is precisely going to be middle class because they are having access to education. So the reality is that we face distant realities in our today's world, and we need to recognize that, and we have a responsibility in higher education to address that. And that's why it becomes kind of awkward to talk about world-class universities when we have a reality that we need to face in our today world. It is a world increasingly integrated, interdependent, and it is a world that no longer ignores what is happening in other parts of the world. And it is important to keep that in mind. It is a new reality that we need to learn to see with different lenses, and for which higher education has very important responsibility. About 5 years ago, the World Bank was heavily involved in the World Higher Education Conference convened by UNESCO, and there were a series of trends that the group working on this document identified as critical trends for this decade. And I just will refer to a few of them. The first one, massification. That is a reality. The total size of higher education in the world has increased dramatically in the last 10 years. It is going to continue increasingly in the future, and that is associated with economic development because we study in order to have better conditions of life, in order to have more revenues, in order to become actors and factors of economic development in our respective communities. However, that massification of higher education in the world is going to start being reduced as our populations become older. Second factor, still an asymmetric access to higher education in the world. More people are studying, but not all in all parts of the world. Still, higher education continues being a privilege of a few. And it is very important to keep that in mind when we talk about world-class universities. Increasingly, international mobility of students. Students are going all over the world. That's another element. There is a revolution in the teaching, learning, and curriculum. All of you are aware of new modalities of teaching, but also modalities of learners. Students think, act differently to the way that we were trained when we were students. Students today are not sequential as we were. They are multitask. They are doing many things at the same time. They even communicate in different ways. They find different ways to process information. That's why I like this cartoon of a student which is talking to his father about the way that he's using technology, and then his father says, well, I was a student, I was using my brain. Another trend is that quality assurance is becoming international. In fact, the issue of the rankings influences a lot the concept of international quality assurance. The question of who has to pay for education will continue being an important factor for decisions in this decade. The private providers of education, as you know, are the most important factor for the growth of higher education in the world. Look at the case of Brazil. Look at the case of the creation of international consortia for offering academic programs. This is the decade in which it will be the largest replacement of faculty members all over the world because people are retiring. The research environment is increasingly internationally collaborative and competitive, and still there is a big gap between those countries who produce a lot of the technology and knowledge and the countries which still have a lot to do. And finally, the issue of technology, which is changing our lives, as you know, and we don't even know what is our name, and that's why it is very important for us in higher education to become very familiar with the use of technology. And that's why I check my email constantly, just in case. OECD also did a very similar analysis, and I won't go in detail into that. I will leave a copy of the presentation available here. Oh my God, look at what's happening here. So I will have to skip that. The reality then is that there is a new context, and this new context requires new solutions, new responses from higher education. And within this context is that we have to ask ourselves, is it worth it to talk about world-class universities? Yes, it is. However, you should see that in the larger context of improving the quality of education for all. Otherwise, we are going to be missing the critical point. Well, the starting point is to talk about what we are talking about. How do we recognize a world-class university? Phil Albach said, first of all, everybody wants to have a world-class university. India is not the exception. Secondly, nobody knows what is a world-class university. And third, nobody knows how to get a world-class university. That's it. That's true. Well, let's try to attempt the definition of world-class university. At least a world-class, according with the Webster Dictionary, world-class is the ranking of the foremost of an international standard of excellence. Well, there are a series of features of world-class universities. As you can imagine, world-class universities are the ones who have international reputation for teaching, for research, who have Nobel Prize laureates, who have many activities that all of us recognize of what it is a world-class university. Even there is a center studying world-class universities in Shanghai. These are the colleagues who created the ranking of Shanghai. Well, the World Bank has been contributing to that study. There is the year 2009, Jamil Sami, which was a predecessor in my job, he edited this book, The Challenge of Establishing World-Class Universities. We have a few copies of that book available today and tomorrow, but if you give us your card, we can send to you a copy of the book, and also we can send you an electronic version of that publication. Jamil developed a model of world-class universities, and basically what he was doing was observing what those self-defined as world-class universities have in common. And those are the elements that he identified as common elements of world-class universities: concentration of talent, favorable governance, and resources. We'll go into that detail after. However, it is important to recognize, as it has been mentioned before by Judith and others, that in order for world-class university to exist, it is critical and important to have a proper ecosystem. I have been cautioned that I have 20 minutes left. Thank you very much. Oh, it's only 2? Come on. And the second element is that it takes time to build a world-class university. That doesn't happen by decree. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of work. Concentration of talent in terms of faculty members, incoming students, and the proper balance between graduate and undergraduate education. Look at this chart with a comparison in some of the so-called world-class universities, how heavy is the percentage of graduate students among the total population of students. Another very important element is the international dimension of the institution. And when we talk about international dimension, we don't refer only to the typical way to see internationalization, which is bringing international students, sending our students abroad, or signing an MOU. In fact, I used to joke about the signing of MOUs, as we saw some of them today. And I used to say that the degree of internationalization of a university is inversely proportional to the number of MOUs that it has signed. I don't know how many you have. As part of the international dimension, it requires, of course, international students. Look at some of the so-called world-class universities. What is the percentage of international students? What is the percentage of international professors? Mobility of people, of course, is here to stay. And you can see that all the numbers are telling us that in the near future, there will be more and more international students. And there are major players, there are middle powers, and also there are evolving destinations. And the question is, where is India in the world of international higher education? We know that India is one of the largest sending countries of students in the world. But what about the capacity to attract the international students? Because international students become a critical factor of internationalization of the institution and also an institution who wants to become a world-class institution. This is the contribution of India to that. And you can see that even though India is having a reduction in the future, still it is a very important player. So in summary, greater international mobility of students, greater competition for international students, and also an emergence of an increasingly sophisticated industry associated with international students. Other aspects of internationalization, very important one, internationalization of the curriculum. Because in the best scenario, still a very limited number of students will go abroad. If we don't do efforts to mobilize our curriculum in order to become truly international, we won't be able to become an international and certainly a world-class institution. Foreign language competency, dual joint degrees, international certification of competencies, international accreditation, and significant presence in relevant international consortia are some of the elements which really become a comprehensive internationalization. In terms of money, of course, it requires world-class universities lots of money, and that requires certainly government support. Look at the case, for instance, of Harvard University, which invests $100,000 per student per year, and then you go down, let's say, for instance, in my own country, Mexico, the National University of Mexico, which only has the capacity to invest $8,000 per student. And of course, that is a big difference. Certainly, if we see the world differently, we will realize that investment in tertiary education varies according to different regions of the world. Government involvement in creating world-class universities also is associated with national grandiose strategies to build those universities. And you can see some of those cases here, China, Japan, Malaysia, Spain, which have ambitions to create world-class universities. That also requires large endowments, rely on the contribution of students to tuition and fees, significant research funding, capacity to attract those monies, and very important, efficient financial and administrative management practices. Because we can have all the money of the world, but we don't have efficient management strategies, of course that is going to become a waste of resources. The other element that Jamil Salmi identified is governance. And favorable governance requires different components. First of all, degrees of freedom regarding the applicability of public policies on human resources and financial matters in higher education institutions. Those institutions which are regarded as world-class universities are the ones which also have autonomy in management of the institution in terms of flexibility and transparency and accountability at the same time, autonomy, consistency, and professionalism in selection of the leadership of the institutions, and finally, independent boards with representation from external stakeholders. Sorry, I just have another 300 and I will finish. Thanks to Phil, I have enough space for presentation. No, don't worry, I will finish almost. The World Bank, for instance, has been studying the issue of governance in institutions. An example is a project that we have in the Middle East and Northern Africa countries, in which 100 higher education institutions have been conducting a benchmarking analysis of what are their governance practices, both at the institutional level as well as at the national level. And this is a project that also is expanding to other regions. It is one initiative that I hope in the future some Indian institutions may be interested in participating in this reflection on how they see themselves in terms of governance in comparison to other peer institutions. So there are basically three pathways to become a world-class university, according with experience in other countries. First one is selecting a few institutions and improve them dramatically. That's the case, for instance, of Malaysia with the universities, which is one University of St. Malaysia. The second one is merging existing institutions, which some countries have been doing that. And the third strategy is creating new institutions from scratch, as you can see in the case of Saudi Arabia. Some of the common mistakes, I don't have time to go through them, but I think it's important to keep in mind on that. One of them is to focus only on the physical resources. We have beautiful buildings, and then we say that we have a world-class university, without taking in consideration that the most important element of a university is its people and also the curriculum, the academic programs. The second one is to have heavy reliance on foreign partners, especially faculty. There is a lot of potential in our own institutions, and we have a lot of capable people. The only problem is that we don't have the conditions to fully utilize their potential. So how do you create a new inertia, a new culture in an institution in order to become a world-class institution? Privileging the development of one set of institutions, of course, leads to sacrificing the development of the other institutions. And of course, we need to create a playing field, and we need to put together a comprehensive strategy, otherwise it's going to fail at the end. And the other problem is insulating and consequently isolating a subsector, a particular type of institution, and of course, that creates the problem of unfair competition and also the problem of limited communication between the different sectors of the higher education component. Other mistakes, supporting capital costs but not operational costs, emphasis of marketing, signing MOUs, tendency to emulate what others are doing without the opportunity to engage in innovation inside our own institutions, importing models that not necessarily may be the right ones, and also limited involvement of other critical stakeholders such as the employers, the alumni, and also the community service organizations, the community-based organizations. And of course, not recognizing that building world-class universities takes time and requires consistency, patience, and a long-term vision. So what to do? All depends on what you want to achieve. There are many cases, many experiences. A second book from the bank is called The Road to Academic Excellence, and it is a book that presents specific cases of institutions in all these countries, including India, of those institutions, how they manage to handle their own characteristics in order to become world-class universities. Remember that there is not a single formula. What it might work in one case might not be the best solution in other cases. It is very important to keep that in mind. All depends on the specific circumstances, ecosystem in which an institution operates. It takes time and it requires an ecosystem. And we in higher education are criticized because we are experts in doing things but not doing things at the same time. The art of ambiguity. Those who criticize university say that the Italian university of 1350 was like the current university of today, in which not too much has changed. And also, we are very good for blaming others, and then to tell that others are the ones who have to resolve our own problems. Of course, I finish just with a word of caution, which is that for every complex problem, there is an answer, and that answer might be clear and simple, but eventually might be wrong. But nevertheless, there is a single formula. If we want to have a better world, we need to have more and better education. And the future is not something that you guess. It is not something that you extrapolate, but it is something that you build with your actions of today. Thank you very much.